January 17th, 1942. Dawn breaks over the frost-covered fields near Leningrad. The horizon glows pale grey, a thin mist clinging to the earth, muffling the distant rumble of artillery. A single propeller slices through the silence, its steady rhythm echoing in the cockpit. Frost patterns cling to the canopy edges, and the pilot's breath fogs the glass as he adjusts his throttle. The Bell P-39 Airacobra shudders slightly under his hands, the mid-mounted engine thrumming behind him, a strange heartbeat for a machine of war. The sky is alive with movement, tracers streak, bullets tear through the thin air, and enemy aircraft drift into view over the icy plains. Every twist of the joystick is measured, every maneuver calculated. The 37mm cannon under the nose waits, silent and deadly. Below, the Soviet infantry moves cautiously, unaware of the Guardian overhead, a lone silhouette weaving between clouds and fire. Each dive brings the roar of the engine closer to the ground, shaking the frozen trees, a reminder that war is not abstract but tangible, a storm of metal, courage and fear. Some call it America's worst fighter, clumsy, underpowered, unfit for high-altitude combat. But in the hands of the right pilot, in the skies of the Eastern Front, it becomes a weapon capable of rewriting the rules of aerial combat. Its story begins not in factories or test flights, but here, where frost, smoke, and steel meet. The P-39's legacy would be forged in fire, measured not by early criticism, but by the 2,400 lives it claimed from the air. The morning light spreads across the battlefield, revealing the first signs of a war that will test every design, every pilot, and every decision. In 1938, the United States was emerging from the shadow of the Great Depression, and the specter of global conflict loomed over Europe and Asia. U.S. Army Air Corps, anticipating modern aerial warfare, sought a fighter capable of excelling at low to medium altitudes. Speed, firepower, and versatility were paramount. Bell Aircraft Company, under the direction of engineer Lawrence Bell, responded with a radical design. The Airacobra. The P-39's configuration defied convention. Its Allison V1710 engine was placed behind the cockpit, connected to the propeller via a long drive shaft. This mid-engine layout allowed for a streamlined nose, which could accommodate a 37mm T9 cannon directly in line with the pilot's sight. A formidable weapon for both air-to-air and ground attack missions. The tricycle landing gear was another innovation, intended to simplify ground handling and improve forward visibility during taxi and takeoff. Yet the design carried inherent trade-offs. The absence of a turbo supercharger limited high-altitude performance, making the P-39 vulnerable against aircraft operating above 15,000 feet. Early test pilots criticized its handling at these elevations, noting sluggishness and reduced maneuverability. The U.S. Army Air Corps, initially enthusiastic, began to regard it as unsuitable for the European theaters, where altitude supremacy was critical. Despite these drawbacks, production commenced. Bell Aircraft, working under tight deadlines and government contracts, produced several hundred units between 1940 and 1941. Engineers continued refining the armor and testing cockpit ergonomics, but the consensus remained. The Airacobra was unorthodox, promising in theory, but flawed in conventional combat doctrine. Internationally, the aircraft world was evolving at unprecedented speed. Germany's Luftwaffe had already demonstrated the lethal efficiency of the Messerschmitt Bf 109, while Britain's Supermarine Spitfire proved the value of high-altitude performance and agility. The P-39 in comparison seemed an anomaly, a fighter built for close-range engagements rather than the sweeping dogfights dominating the skies over Poland and France. The onset of war in Europe accelerated U.S. production priorities, but American commanders were hesitant to deploy the Airacobra to frontline units. Many aircraft were stored, tested, or relegated to training roles. Bell continued to iterate on engine cooling, armament integration, and airframe adjustments, striving to overcome critics' doubts. As the conflict widened, the U.S. faced a strategic choice. The P-39's unique low-altitude capabilities, though underestimated at home, could find purpose elsewhere. When the Soviet Union entered the war in 1941, the stage was set for the Airacobra's true test, not over the skies of Western Europe, but over the frozen plains and forests of the Eastern Front. By mid-1941, the Lend-Lease program was gaining momentum. The United States, still formally neutral in the global conflict, committed to supplying Allied nations with materiel, including aircraft, tanks, and weapons. Among these transfers, the P-39 Airacobra was sent in significant numbers to the Soviet Union, whose pilots were facing the devastating blitzkrieg tactics of the German Wehrmacht. Upon arrival, Soviet pilots approached the P-39 with skepticism. The aircraft's reputation in US circles as underpowered and unsuitable preceded it. Its mid-engine design was unfamiliar, cockpit visibility unusual, and the absence of a turbo supercharger made high-altitude interception impossible. Yet these perceived flaws aligned with the unique conditions of the Eastern Front, where most aerial engagements and ground support missions occurred at lower altitudes. Training programs were intensive. Soviet instructors adapted American manuals, emphasizing tactics suited to the Airacobra's strengths. Pilots were taught to exploit the 37mm cannon, capable of destroying armored vehicles and bombers with a single well-aimed shot. Maneuvering techniques were modified to take advantage of its low-altitude stability. Unlike in Western Europe, where air superiority often depended on vertical engagements, the vast forested plains and frozen rivers of the Eastern Front demanded fighters that could dive, weave, and strike quickly. Initial combat missions validated this approach. P-39s patrolling the skies over Leningrad and Stalingrad engaged Luftwaffe reconnaissance aircraft and dive bombers with surprising effectiveness. Its speed at low altitude, combined with a heavy armament loadout, allowed Soviet pilots to inflict significant damage while minimizing exposure to enemy fighters optimized for high-altitude combat. Reports from these early sorties noted exceptional survivability and precise firepower, unexpected attributes for an aircraft dismissed by US evaluators. The P-39 became especially valuable in ground attack roles. Soviet forces, often encountering mechanized German columns, found the 37mm cannon decisive against tanks and transport vehicles. Pilots developed tactics for strafing runs, combining the Airacobra's heavy nose gun with flexible maneuvering, achieving results that were both lethal and strategically impactful. Unlike American units, which had relegated the P-39 to secondary theaters or training, the Soviet adaptation transformed perceived weaknesses into operational strengths. By late 1942, the P-39 had earned a new identity. Though flawed in the eyes of its designers, it became a cornerstone of Soviet low-altitude air operations. It allowed experienced pilots to maximize kills, protect ground forces, and execute daring attacks against enemy supply lines. The aircraft's story was shifting from failure to triumph, setting the stage for the extraordinary accomplishments that would later define its legacy. The transformation of the P-39 from an American cast-off to a Soviet workhorse reveals the intersection of design, environment, and human ingenuity, a prelude to the angles of human experience, tactical adaptation, and technological exploitation that would follow. For the pilots of the Soviet Air Force, the P-39 Airacobra was more than a machine. It was a challenge demanding adaptation, precision, and courage. Unlike familiar Soviet designs, the mid-engine configuration shifted the aircraft's center of gravity, altering its handling characteristics. Every turn required anticipation, every dive demanded exact calculation. Pilots quickly learned that finesse mattered more than brute force, that understanding the aircraft's temperament could mean the difference between life and death. Combat revealed the Airacobra's true value at low altitudes. Its stability allowed pilots to conduct strafing runs with deadly accuracy, a critical advantage against German armored columns and supply convoys. Unlike high-altitude engagements, these battles were intimate, visceral. Pilots reported feeling the vibrations of the 37mm cannon reverberate through the fuselage with each shot, hearing the roar of engines and the crackle of tracer fire in a symphony of war. Every successful strike reinforced confidence, every near miss demanded humility and instant adaptation. Human ingenuity extended beyond individual skill. Soviet units developed coordinated tactics, pairing P-39s with Yak-1s and IL-2 Sturmoviks to maximize combined firepower. Pilots exploited terrain, forests, rivers, and urban structures, to mask approaches, ambush enemy formations, and create opportunities for decisive attacks. These improvisations transformed a perceived underperformer into a versatile asset, capable of striking both air and ground targets with precision. Morale became entwined with the aircraft's reputation. Early skepticism gave way to respect, and eventually to pride. The P-39 became a symbol of adaptability, an instrument in the hands of pilots who could read the machine's limits and push them. Letters from the front described the tension of takeoff, the exhilaration of a successful attack, and the eerie quiet after a sortie, when the airfield returned to frost and silence. These human narratives reveal a critical insight. Technology alone does not determine success. Skill, intuition, and the ability to exploit strengths while mitigating weaknesses define an aircraft's effectiveness. In the P-39, the human element unlocked potential unseen by designers and dismissed by critics. Tactical application mirrored this human adaptation. Pilots learned to dive sharply, using the aircraft's low-altitude speed to surprise enemy fighters. Coordinated squadrons struck from unexpected angles, maximizing the 37mm cannon's impact while minimizing exposure. Dogfights became calculated dances, a series of maneuvers that rewarded patience, timing, and intimate knowledge of the aircraft's capabilities. The Airacobra's perceived inferiority vanished in skilled hands, replaced by a weapon that could dominate localized engagements. The interplay between pilot and machine forged a new narrative. Human skill reshaped perception, turning a flawed design into a battlefield asset. This transformation, rooted in adaptation and ingenuity, connects directly to the technological and leadership perspectives that guided the P-39's operational success. The P-39 Airacobra's technological design was a radical departure from conventional fighter architecture. Its engine placement behind the cockpit, long drive shaft, and tricycle landing gear created a unique flight profile. The aircraft's most notable feature, the 37mm T9 cannon, was mounted directly in the nose, firing through the propeller hub. This allowed pilots to aim with remarkable precision, a direct extension of their line of sight. In low-altitude engagements, the cannon could disable bombers, destroy lightly armored vehicles, and penetrate enemy fighter fuselages. Despite its innovations, the Airacobra carried inherent limitations. Without a turbo supercharger, its high-altitude performance suffered. Climb rates were modest, and at elevations above 15,000 feet, the aircraft was vulnerable to faster, more agile fighters such as the Bf-109. Nevertheless, its low-altitude performance was exceptional. The Allison engine, though unsuited for SUSTI, NED high-altitude combat, delivered reliable power in the environments where most Eastern Front engagements occurred. Armor protection around the cockpit and fuel tanks further increased pilot survivability, a critical factor in protracted air operations. Leadership decisions played a defining role in the P-39's success. U.S. commanders initially withheld the aircraft from frontline deployment, deeming it inadequate. In contrast, Soviet commanders embraced the Airacobra's strengths. Tactical doctrine was adapted to exploit low-altitude maneuverability, emphasizing dive attacks, ambushes, and support for ground troops. Pilots were encouraged to operate within the envelope where the aircraft excelled, rather than forcing it into unsuitable high-altitude engagements. Production and logistics reflected this alignment between technology and leadership. Lend-lease transfers prioritized distribution to experienced units capable of maximizing the Airacobra's advantages. Maintenance protocols were adapted to Soviet conditions, with crews improvising solutions for engine cooling and ammunition resupply. Commanders coordinated these resources strategically, ensuring the aircraft could sustain extended campaigns without operational degradation. Comparative analysis highlights the Airacobra's niche. Against the Luftwaffe, high-altitude fighters like the Bf-109 outperformed it in vertical dogfights. Against Allied aircraft such as the British Spitfire, it appeared underwhelming on paper. Yet in the Eastern Front's low-altitude battles, it excelled. Its combination of firepower, stability, and pilot adaptability created a force multiplier, allowing even smaller units to achieve disproportionate tactical effects. integration of technological design and leadership foresight transformed the P-39 from a marginalized fighter into a strategic instrument. By exploiting its strengths and mitigating weaknesses, commanders and engineers ensured that the aircraft was not judged solely by initial specifications, but by the results it produced in the crucible of war. The alignment of human skill, technology, and leadership set the stage for the Airacobra's decisive impact on combat operations. The aircraft was no longer merely a tool, it became an instrument of tactical mastery, culminating in the peak performance and extraordinary achievements that define its legacy. By the summer of 1943, the Eastern Front had become a crucible of attrition. The Battle of Kursk, the largest tank engagement in history, was looming. Soviet pilots had already logged hundreds of hours in P-39 Airacobras, refining tactics and pushing the aircraft's limits. In their hands, the plane's previously criticized traits, low-altitude stability, heavy armament, and robust construction, became decisive advantages. On July 5, 1943, the skies above the Kursk salient were thick with smoke and anticipation. Luftwaffe formations, composed of Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf FW-190s, penetrated Soviet defensive lines. P-39s, flying in tight squadrons, intercepted at treetop level, exploiting their superior low-altitude speed and maneuverability. Pilots like Alexander Pokryshkin maneuvered through clouds of tracer fire, aligning the massive 37mm cannon with enemy aircraft in fleeting seconds. Every shot counted, every miss could be fatal. The Airacobra's performance in these engagements defied its earlier reputation. Dive and zoom tactics allowed Soviet pilots to strike quickly, then retreat into cover provided by forests, ridges, and smoke from the battlefield below. The P-39's cannon could destroy bombers in a single well-aimed burst, neutralizing threats to ground forces with a precision that lighter armaments could not achieve. In dogfights with enemy fighters, pilots relied on tight turns at low altitude, using the aircraft's stability to outlast adversaries. These battles were not abstract exercises, they were measured in lives saved, tanks destroyed, and supply lines preserved. Soviet accounts describe the tension of intercepting incoming formations, the adrenaline of a successful attack, and the grim calculation of risk. Pilots developed instinctive coordination with ground units, timing strikes to coincide with artillery barrages or armored advances, amplifying their effectiveness. The P-39's influence extended beyond individual sorties. Squadron leaders adapted formation tactics to maximize overlapping fields of fire. Pilots rotated positions, ensuring that the most experienced flew point while newer aviators learned in live engagements. Communication and precision became as vital as firepower, with the Airacobra's strengths dictating strategy rather than strategy constraining the aircraft. By the end of the first week of combat over Kursk, Soviet P-39 units had established dominance at low altitudes. Enemy aircraft were forced to retreat to higher elevations, where the Airacobra's limitations became irrelevant. The majority of tactical engagements had shifted to zones where the aircraft excelled. This mastery of environment and machine marked a turning point. The P-39, once derided, was now a weapon capable of altering the course of the air campaign over the Eastern Front. The stage was set for the next phase, the peak achievements, the staggering kill counts, and the dispelling of the Airacobra's myth as a flawed fighter. By late 1943, the P-39 Airacobra had shed its reputation as a mediocre fighter. Soviet pilots, operating in the low-altitude environment of the Eastern Front, had turned it into one of the most effective aircraft in their arsenal. Alexander Pokryshkin, Grigory Rechkolov, and other aces amassed extraordinary kill counts, collectively contributing to over 2,400 confirmed enemy aircraft destroyed with the Airacobra, a record unmatched by any other American-designed fighter in Soviet service. The aircraft's 37mm cannon proved decisive against both bombers and lightly armored ground targets. In the dense forests and river valleys of Ukraine and Belarus, P-39 pilots executed precision strikes that disrupted German supply lines and armored advances. Unlike high-altitude fighters, the Airacobra could loiter over contested areas, providing close air support while maintaining tactical flexibility. The combination of concentrated firepower and maneuverability allowed Soviet units to achieve disproportionate effects with relatively small numbers of aircraft. Individual pilot accounts illustrate the P-39's transformation from overlooked to feared. Pilots described the thrill of diving into enemy formations, cannon fire tearing through fuselages, and the instant recalibration required after each engagement. The cockpit's unusual layout, once criticized for discomfort, became a familiar instrument of mastery. Experienced aviators learned to anticipate the aircraft's behavior under stress, using it to their advantage in dogfights and ground attack missions alike. Operational data reinforced these personal accounts. Squadrons reported mission success rates that exceeded expectations, with lower loss ratios compared to other fighters in similar roles. German combat reports acknowledged the effectiveness of Soviet P-39 units, noting their tenacity and precise coordination. Where the Airacobra had been dismissed by American planners as unsuitable for frontline combat, it had proven indispensable in the hands of trained, adaptable pilots. The P-39's myth as a poor fighter was irrevocably dispelled by these campaigns. Its limitations at high altitude were irrelevant in the theaters where it was deployed, and its advantages were amplified by tactical ingenuity and leadership that recognized the aircraft's true potential. The interplay of design, environment, and human skill had created a scenario in which an American-designated failure became a Soviet instrument of dominance. This peak performance of the P-39 represents not only the apex of its operational history, but also a pivotal moment in World War II air warfare. The success of these pilots and their aircraft would directly shape the subsequent phases of the Eastern Front, influencing both strategic planning and the morale of combatants. By the close of 1944, the operational record of the P-39 Airacobra was firmly established. Over 4,700 units had been delivered to the Soviet Union through Lend-Lease, far outnumbering those retained in U.S. service. Combat reports from the front lines confirmed that the aircraft had become a decisive, low-altitude platform, excelling in both air-to-air engagements and ground attack missions. Losses, while significant, were mitigated by the combination of pilot skill, tactical coordination, and the aircraft's rugged construction. Soviet analyses highlighted several key performance metrics. Engagements against Luftwaffe aircraft showed a disproportionately high kill ratio at altitudes below 5,000 meters, precisely where the P-39's Allison engine operated efficiently. The 37mm cannon was particularly effective against bombers, transport planes, and lightly armored vehicles, delivering results that lighter armament could not replicate. Reports emphasized the aircraft's role in disrupting enemy supply lines, protecting advancing infantry, and providing close air support, a function the U.S. Army Air Corps had originally undervalued. From a production standpoint, Bell aircraft and Soviet maintenance units faced challenges. The mid-engine layout required specialized repairs, and field units often improvised to maintain operational readiness. Despite these logistical hurdles, squadrons maintained a high sortie rate, reflecting the resilience of both the aircraft and the ground crews who serviced it under extreme conditions. The immediate post-combat evaluation also considered pilot experience and training. Veteran Soviet aviators demonstrated that success with the P-39 depended less on raw horsepower or climb rate and more on understanding its handling, exploiting strengths, and executing disciplined, low-altitude tactics. Letters and diaries from pilots consistently praised its stability, firepower, and survivability in the environments where most of the war's decisive engagements occurred. Strategically, the P-39's contributions were substantial. Its presence allowed Soviet commanders to commit fewer aircraft to certain missions, confident that each sortie could deliver precise and effective results. The aircraft's effectiveness at low altitude shaped operational doctrine, reinforcing the emphasis on combined arms and close coordination with ground forces. Its unexpected utility also influenced the assessment of foreign technology and the adaptation of designs to specific theaters of war. The Airacobra had, in effect, rewritten the operational rules that initially deemed it inferior. From a sidelined American prototype to a cornerstone of Soviet aerial strategy, it exemplified the dynamic interplay between technology, human ingenuity, and tactical deployment, a transition that would inform both immediate wartime operations and a long-term study of air combat. In the years following World War II, the P-39 Airacobra's reputation continued to evolve. Initially dismissed by American aviation authorities as a flawed fighter, historical assessment gradually acknowledged its significant role on the Eastern Front. Soviet records and post-war analyses confirmed that over 2,400 confirmed aerial kills were achieved by P-39 pilots, making it the most successful American fighter in Soviet service. This statistical achievement challenged pre-war assumptions about aircraft design, demonstrating that operational context and pilot skill could outweigh theoretical specifications. Surviving P-39s became artifacts of a complex legacy. Museums in Moscow, Kubinka, and the United States preserve examples of the aircraft, highlighting both its unconventional design and battlefield achievements. Historians emphasize the lessons embedded in its service that technological innovation must be evaluated within the environment in which it is employed, and that human adaptation can redefine the effectiveness of even the most criticized machines. The Airacobra also influenced post-war aviation thought. Designers noted the potential of integrating heavy forward armament with fighter aircraft, particularly for low to medium altitude operations. The success of Soviet pilots in exploiting its strengths prompted re-evaluation of fighter doctrine, including emphasis on training to maximize platform capabilities, rather than imposing rigid combat expectations based on specifications alone. Cultural memory reinforced the dichotomy of perception versus reality. In the United States, the P-39 remained largely obscure, overshadowed by aircraft like the P-51 Mustang and P-38 Lightning. In contrast, within the Soviet Union, it became a symbol of adaptability and technical ingenuity, celebrated in pilot memoirs and wartime accounts as a tool that transformed the odds in critical engagements. Ultimately, the P-39 Airacobra's legacy is defined less by its original design intentions and more by its operational context and the pilots who mastered it. Its journey, from an American prototype derided for its shortcomings to a Soviet weapon of aerial dominance, illustrates how perception, environment, and human ingenuity converge in warfare. This duality of overlooked potential realized under extreme conditions forms the enduring narrative of the Airacobra, bridging its technological design with its historical impact. The story of the P-39 Airacobra is a study in perception, adaptation, and human ingenuity. An aircraft dismissed as inferior in one theater became a decisive tool in another, proving that the effectiveness of technology is inseparable from the conditions in which it is employed and the skill of those who wield it. The Airacobra's low-altitude dominance, forged on the frozen plains and forests of the Eastern Front, exemplifies how limitations can be transformed into strengths through strategy, innovation, and experience. Its legacy extends beyond statistics or kill counts. The P-39 challenges assumptions about design, testing, and operational doctrine, reminding historians and engineers alike that machines are not defined solely by specifications on paper. The pilot, the environment, and the tactical vision together shape outcomes, often in ways that defy initial judgment. In this interplay, the Airacobra transcends its original purpose, becoming a symbol of adaptability and the human capacity to harness technology under extreme circumstances. As engines fall silent on abandoned airfields and frost settles where propellers once cut the air, the echoes of those battles linger. The Airacobra's story is not one of failure nor simple triumph, but of transformation, an enduring lesson that innovation, perception, and skill can converge to rewrite history, even in the skies of war. The P-39's journey from derided fighter to celebrated warplane closes a chapter in aviation history while leaving an indelible mark on our understanding of technology, conflict, and human ingenuity.